And for many students, the writing process, and for many researchers, the writing process is a very complicated machine. Here in Denmark, we of course have a Storm P as a iconic designer of overly complicated machines. Now, the reason I show you this image is that one of the first things I say to students and researchers, and it's very important to keep in mind that I say exactly the same thing to first-year students as I say to full professors about how writing works and what it is, because we're doing academic writing. So I ask them to consider the situation where they have one thing they know, they have 1 minute to communicate it to one other person who knows something about the subject. And of course, when I ask them what would be the ideal medium to communicate one thing you know in 1 minute to one other person who knows something about the subject, they come up with some pretty intricate devices, YouTube videos, conversations, lectures, and so forth. And then I remind them that there's actually a very simple technology which is called writing, and it is a perfectly good technology for communicating what you know to other knowledgeable people for the purpose of discussing it with them. I started developing my approach to this writing issue about 10 years ago here at CBS. Of course, there's a wonderful literature, many self-help books called things like How to Write a Lot, and this one is one that I read, Paul Sylvia's book. He's a psychologist, and so he started with a lot of why don't people write, because they have various psychological barriers to writing and so forth. I realized that his authority as a psychologist allowed him to talk in those terms, and I was working at a business school, so I needed a different model. I couldn't talk as a psychologist about writing, and so we have actually a wonderful model here at a business school. We have it back in the 90s. This book is from the 90s. There was something called Business Process Reengineering. People will recognize it today more as lean management. It's a pretty classic consulting product. And so I just kind of decided to put these two things together and invent something that I call Writing Process Reengineering. The important thing to keep in mind is that the way you communicate one thing you know in 1 minute to one other knowledgeable person is to write a paragraph. So you might be worried that you're not going to write enough paragraphs. You might be worried that you're not going to write them well enough to get a good grade or get published, whatever your desire might be. Or you might be unhappy while you write. And all of these three things, like any good consultant, is something I promise that I'll fix for you. I point out that scholars are always people who are talking to each other about what they know for the purpose of challenging and correcting each other. I encourage scholars to take a moment in which to write. So a great way of thinking about this is that you can compose a paragraph about something you know in 27 minutes. That number, 27 minutes, has become kind of part of the brand. So when I talk to students, I'm encouraging them always to sit down and write one thing they know in at least 6 sentences and at most 200 words. And that takes about a minute to read, interestingly enough. I tell them what a paragraph is. And I point out that every paragraph says one thing. So it has a key sentence, and this helps them to organize their work. I then tell them that a research paper, for example, of 8,000 words will consist of about 40 paragraphs. You just take 8,000 and divide by 200. This is, again, a very simple consulting product, right? So you take 8,000, you divide by 200, you know there's 40 paragraphs. You have to know one thing to write a paragraph, which means you have to know 40 things to write a journal article. That's nice to know. Right? It will take you about 20 hours if you're in good shape. If you take a 3-minute break, that's 2 paragraphs an hour. That's great to know. If you're in really good shape, you can do it in 18 minutes plus 2 minutes. It's 3 paragraphs an hour. It's very nice to know. Right? Obviously, I am not beyond setting up some rules for people if they want that kind of discipline. There is a certain measure of irony to these rules. You'll notice they start always, never, always, never. There's 5 more because my rules go to 11. And then I challenge researchers to think of their semester, and students as well, to think of their semester as being divided into chunks of about 8 weeks, where they can write between 20 and 120 hours, which is between 40 and 240 paragraphs, which is between 1 and 6 journal articles worth of prose. And it's, again, nice to know that we have that kind of proportion. And then I leave them with this lovely bon mot of my own design. The essence of planning is to appreciate your finitude, which is to say knowing when to stop.